Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Before we start our official presentation, I'm just going to ask Ray to start us off in a good way in some of the language from the land that we are here sharing and presenting on.
So gully walk weg, Ray John you and gets of no mother that they get the loader. They what the home see you stay. Qua to be go ne the Yokino ha. Da to ne Gayon Hitzler. Done that talk the Hagen at what they go. Oguego, Huskajina Ratnani and what they go, they hit one of the la don and then they go jokwa. Jisa go to go, Neho Digo Loda, done they talk the Hagen and what they go. Oguego, Huskajina, what you know, and what they go, they hit one of the la don and then Awahit. Jisago, Gadoga, and then he would dig out Loda, down the talk the Hagen and then what they go. Oguego, Huskajina, and what you don't need and what they go. They tended to Hila Don and then Hono, but Jisago, Gadoga, and then he would Loda, down the talk the Hagen and then what they go. They you got gonna get in high and a gua. Hadi on Daqua. A guego, Huskajin, and what we know in and what they go, they had one on the la door, they had Itwa Chica Laqua, Jisa go, Kadoga, and then he got Loda, down the Tota Hagen and then what they go. A guego, Huskajin, and what they know in and what they go, they had one on the la door, Yuki Sot. Qua do we go on down they told the Hagen and then what they go. Then they ho now they say how long down there. So allow me to speak freely on this platform. And we combine our minds together as one. In the subject that we are going to learn about today, that is where it came from. These are the words that we speak and that we bring our minds and our spirit together as one. So that whatever we need to ask is done today. Don't wait till you're halfway home. Don't be messaging us and say, what did you mean? Or what can I ask this? Do it now. In this platform, we are here to do that for you today. And as we begin off on this journey, that's what was provided to me. And I'm just going to sit down here. My dear Jodie came one time and she says, we were sitting in my living room. She says, what about AI? I said, what about it? She says, would you mind working with it? And the first thing that came up was these red flags. And I thought, I don't know. So I conversed with a couple of community people. And she came back and she's very persistent. She said, what about AI? I said, well, let's try it. Let's see what it can do. And I think it kind of took her back because she thought I was going to say no. But I always remember my father, when he talked about our people, the Hongwe people, that when anything that came into our presence, we studied it, we acknowledged it. And what is it going to do for our people? So we sat with it so many times, like the bow and arrow, like tools, like a different animal. We had to study it. So we took this form, and what is it going to do for us? What is it going to provide? So lo and behold, got into call, and I met this young man you're going to see in a few short minutes. He says, this is what I took the liberty of showing you, Ray. And as soon as he spoke, I could see where it was going to go, using the perspective of what I know about my people. These aren't just stories. This was handed down. Came right from our language. That's how we know that we have always been here and what I shared. And after that meeting, we waited a couple months. What does he do? He impresses me by adding more things to it. I took your words and I added this. I said, holy man, we got something here. And then we kept going. And every time I spoke to him, I didn't think he was listening because he was too busy doing this. But he was listening. And then he showed me again. And I thought, damn, this kid's got it. He's catching everything that I've spoken about. And then finally, our last meeting, he impressed me even further. And I don't impress easy. But I say that in front of the public that he captured something. He went from just straight planting to fishing, to hunting. And in everything that about our people was in there. And I said, you captured exactly what we've been talking about for centuries. And if this tool, which it is, can teach the young ones how we did it and also encourage them to go out and try it, then we made a step forward. So all the way back to that, when I was first asked, what about AI? If we utilize it the best way we can, but the very first thing is if we have fear, then that is when it's going to showcase us that it is wrong. We need to now progress forward in getting our voices here. Our voices are the ones that are carrying it. Again, I go back to all of those steps. My father said, well, what does it do? What does it provide? And that was exactly what I asked and what we're dealing with now. And so when we unveil this to the school boards, to the students, to the teachers, we've already did the hard work in capturing Indigenous perspective. And so those words that I said for that are the very ones that we showcased in this tool. And then in these words, I thank the mother. She provides everything for us. Then I thank the people, the individuals that are sitting here, but also the ancestors that are behind you and in front of you. And then I talked about the little plants that we are in the month of strawberries, and we thank them. And then I thank the medicines that we take, that takes care of us and walks with us all the time. Then I descended it up into the air, and I talked and I thanked this sun. Do you know that we are the last ones to complain about everything? You don't see nature do that. You don't see the birds say, it's too hot. You don't see the animals say, it's too hot. They deal with it. So we have to make sure that we humble ourselves to know that how powerful that sun is. Then I also talk about later on that we will see the moon, our grandmother, who will guide our way to wherever we need to. It will guide our way home, whatever we need to. And in that also is an understanding that all of the women that are here present today understand that that is their grandmother as well. And then finally, I brought it all together into one energy, which is what created us. In that energy, we don't know it's male or female. All we know is that it helped create us. And when we give thanks, that's all you have to do is say thank you. Thank you to all the ones that came before us, but most importantly, thank your parents for giving you life. Thank your mom. Thank your dad. Thank your grandparents. Thank your ancestors for providing all that. So as we bring it all back to where we are now, let this part be open so we can have a very mighty discussion.
So that's a little bit about how we do a land acknowledgement. So just so you see the difference there. So my name is Jodie Williams, and I work in a couple of capacities. I'm now the past chair of the First Nations Métis Inuit Education Association of Ontario, which is actually how I got to meet Dr. George Gadanidis. And several years ago, we were approached also by Donna Kostopoulos, and asked us if we wanted to explore Indigenous knowledges in mathematics. And of course we said absolutely, because one of the things we struggle with in education is the erasure when it comes to Indigenous peoples and knowledges, and heaps of stereotypes that we're trying to counter and provide the correct narrative. And one way to do that is to showcase how sophisticated and complex and genius knowledge systems are. And when we think about, because we work in a system that holds up and values Western science, but that knowledge system's only been around for a couple hundred years. So how could you possibly say that is way more better than something that's been tried, trusted, and true for thousands and thousands and thousands of years? So when we were approached about, it's funny hearing Ray saying, me coming to him about, what about AI? Because I think I said the same thing to George. I'm like, what? AI? I don't know about this. Let me ask a few people. And so you heard one of the people that I had mentioned this to. We have also worked with a few other community members on this project, and it became very much that, a discussion around, is this something we can even enter into? What a strange, nobody really considered it, and like Ray was saying, we're going to showcase a little bit of our projects, but we're also going to talk about, which you've heard bits so far with the last two speakers, about some of the things that we need to be very, very mindful of when it comes to data and colonialism and extraction of knowledge and ownership of knowledge. And we'll also talk about a little bit about what are when we say Indigenous knowledge systems, what does that even mean? What is our connection to that? And really that gets into understanding this deep connection to the land. And when we say land, we mean everything, like the sky, the stars, the rocks, the plants, the animals, everything. And it doesn't matter where anybody is from. As humans, we are intimately connected with all of that. Just some of us have lost that connection, and some folks are a little bit more connected. And so this was kind of this really interesting collaborative project that, like Ray was saying, offers an opportunity to get kids in education thinking about their connection to the land and their roles and responsibilities with that. I also work as the Indigenous Education Lead for Dufferin-Peel Catholic District School Board, and a lot of the work that I do both provincially as well as in my role is try to help almost kind of be like a translator of two very different worlds, and how do we bring them together to co-create something really beautiful and new in partnership. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I'm just going to invite our colleague Mathias up to introduce himself.
My name is Mathias Babin. I'm a PhD student here at Western. I currently study computer science, so my background here is in artificial intelligence, and that's what I try and bring to the table on this project. But one thing I want to say before we go further into the presentation is it was such a pleasure to work with both Ray, Jodie, everyone else on the team. And I'm really excited to show you what we built here today. It was definitely not an easy process trying to bridge what seems like these two very different worlds and bring everything together was a great learning experience for all of us. So thank you, Jodie. And I'm sure I'll speak to you again momentarily. Thank you.
So how we're going to do this, because we had to change some things around last minute. So rather than an official keynote, we're going to chunk our time out. It'll be kind of like a long, drawn-out discussion, and we'll pause at various moments and give you discussion questions to talk about in your little groups, however you want to group yourself for that. And for those who are tuning in live, we have QR codes. So for those of you who are here, you can also use the QR code on your phone. If you're not familiar with a Padlet, you will become very familiar, because we're going to use Padlet as our platform to collect people's thoughts and reflections on that. So let's kind of dive into, and I forgot to mention, and we'll just take natural breaks when it seems right. Let's talk about a little bit, and I'm going to move it back over to Ray to just talk a little bit about when we say Indigenous knowledge systems, what are some examples of what we're talking about with that?
Indigenous knowledge systems are exactly what we talked about. Is not just the land. It is everything that encompasses on the land. What is the life cycle that they all perform? To us, those are all communities. And anything that when you go into that community, what are you going there for and what are you disrupting? So we have to be mindful of that. And then there's, above that, what other systems is there? Well, there's the weather system, and then I alluded to that. There is also the sun system and its stars, that type of system. There is the moon. There is a projectile of wind and the rain. Everything is a system, and we have knowledge for that. Again, direct influence from our people on how things shape and how things come. When we start to understand that, then we start to reflect on how does it all work, and we work with that all the time. There's a direct quote from the great law of my people, the Haudenosaunee, that says, never go against the forces of nature, which means is that if it was put there for a reason, leave it there. It also states that never try to force anything. So these little subtle things that we've been taught, we look at it and we force it, or not force it, we put it into our everyday life. How often do people get up and thank the day, regardless if there's no sun? In our language, we say, we would say Sogoli, and we would say Ne Wahnisla De. Wahnisla De does not translate into sun. It means a good day that you're still alive. Be thankful for that. We can complain again, but are we really being thankful for the day that we're given? The other parts of that, in that system, is that our language is intact. That's how we greet each other, but also how we greet nature. So it is up to us to make sure that those systems stay there, and we teach anybody that's willing to learn. Much forth of what we're doing here. But when I say Indigenous people, I'm not talking about ones in Canada. I'm talking about globally. So it's up to all of us to keep those systems going. So that's where it is all the time. As those systems come from that, we acknowledge that and know that it is a part of that type of community. I'll give you an example. I do a live stream from my board, and I work for the London District Catholic School Board as a culture advisor. And one of the lessons I taught to the kids is about the system about a frog. I said, don't go over there and pick him up. Leave him alone. And he says, why, Ray? He said, because he's out there, he's got a job to do. And they're fascinated. Well, what's the job? I said, he keeps the bugs away. I said, every time you're slapping mosquitoes, what do you think he's trying to do? He's trying to take that away from you. I said, if you take that frog and you get rid of him, you know who doesn't eat? Who? I said, the fish. And you know who don't get to eat the fish? The birds. And then you don't know who gets to eat the birds? We do. Oh, those types of systems we have to teach them about. And from that point on, they understood that. Just last week, we finished up our last one. We talked about the turtle. And I just got a cool picture from one of my colleagues. He says, look what we found on the road that you talked about. I said, see, they're going to lay their eggs. Did you leave it alone? Yes, because you told us not to do that. Just watch and be sure that we are protecting them. I said, good for you. So those types of systems is very easily put in so they understand, and they become those people that are now more than allies, supporters. Okay.
So a lot of what we're going to share today is on the actual website through which this project is based out of, and you know, under the site that talks about AI and Indigenous knowledge systems, there are several videos, as well as these key concepts that kind of echo what Ray was sharing. And you know, things that we have to consider when working in the educational spaces that we are all working in is that the education system is very much still a tool for colonialism, in that it has and continues to erase Indigenous peoples, nations. I'll give you a great example. What map do we teach kids? The map of Canada. We get them to color in the provinces. Can anybody here confidently point out where the Anishinaabe Nation is, where the Mushkego are, where the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and their territories are? They're still here. Isn't that amazing? So we don't even realize how damaging the education system continues to be when we talk about erasure, when we talk about the devaluing of knowledge systems. Who gets to choose what goes in? And so we're kind of on this new era, I guess, in education where we're recognizing this and starting to have these conversations. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, about the importance of how do we do this work, and we're centering Indigenous peoples, communities, the knowledge that has to be the center and leading the forefront. Because prior to colonization here, and these lands were the last in the world to experience colonization, and I still want to emphasize it's still ongoing. It's not a thing of the past. It's very much ongoing. But when we think about how smart one has to be to live without a garbage can, I challenge you to try it. Try to go one whole week and live without producing any kind of garbage. There's a technology and a sophistication involved in that, because today we're grappling with climate change. And so a lot of what we're going to share with you is focused on how do Indigenous knowledge systems actually help in this solution, because this should be actually the number one thing that we're all focused on. Some say we're beyond the tipping point. And so how are we creating our young children and students, how are we turning them out to be climate leaders and to be thinking very differently? Because we don't have much time left. And so how do we use this tool? Like we said, this is another technology tool that we can use for something really good. And that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm not sure, Mathias, how's your computer situation happening with speaking of technology, it wouldn't be a proper conference without some technology challenges, right? So we're going to share with you, I guess we'll play the video, the little bit of the video, and then we'll try and switch over hopefully to your computer. I think it's interesting. I know it's already been shared a little bit, but does anybody really fully understand, like, what the heck is a neural network? Because I was like, what, when I heard about this, when we first started with this project. And so we created this video as just a little helpful mini explainer, and so we'll share that with you. And then Mathias is going to talk a little bit about this first simulation that we started to play around with, but also kind of what's going on in the background, because it's important to remember that machines, I know we're all like, captivated by like Hollywood ideas about the robots are going to take over and they're going to become human and all of that, but we're nowhere near that. And in fact, our simulations show the very opposite. In fact, the work that we did kind of makes me feel like I'm going to put my money in AI. It's actually going to do a better job. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute about that.
Nearly everyone has heard of AI, but a lot of people are unclear with exactly what it is and what it can do. In this video, we will introduce what AI is and give you a better understanding of how they learn, think, and view the world. Nearly all of the modern advancements in AI come from a field called machine learning. As the name suggests, the field studies how to build computer-based methods that learn, as opposed to more rigid traditional ways that require a set of instructions which detail how to complete a task. These are called algorithms. Let's look at the example of playing a game of chess. You can imagine the problem of creating an AI to play chess. Without machine learning, this problem can be solved using an algorithm. One way to do this would be to assign a number to every possible configuration of the chessboard. We then design a set of instructions for selecting which move the computer should take based on these values. In machine learning, we aim to let the computer learn on its own what the best strategy to win is. So what is machine learning? In order for the computer to learn its own way of doing things, it will need a way to process incoming information and transform into something useful for its task, something like our brain. The backbone of nearly all modern systems are called artificial neural networks. This is how AIs think. It is their brains. Now let's consider some of the types of tasks that we need an AI to do. Remember, a task is a problem that we wish the AI to solve. This could be playing chess, driving a car, summarizing articles, optimizing traffic, creating art, handwriting recognition. How we design and interpret the numbers that go into and get back from the neural network will depend on the task we are trying to do. Let's look at an example of how a machine would learn to solve the task of recognizing digits handwritten by a human. As an example, we have this number 8. For a computer to interpret what it is seeing, we will have to find a way to represent it using a series of other numbers. One way to represent this problem is to look at each pixel that makes up the digit. We can use a number that corresponds to a shade of gray. For example, black pixels will have a value of a 0, white pixels will have a value of 255, and every other shade of gray will be assigned a value in between. In the end, the computer will see a grid of numbers that it can use to help determine what was written. In our example, this grid of numbers has a total of 784 values. These are the numbers that will be passed into the input layer of our AI's neural network. We can see that this information is passed through the network and is getting transformed into one of 10 possible digits in the output layer of this network. This is the AI's guess as to what number was written. Initially, an AI has no idea what its input is and what output it should be providing or what task it is even solving. In our last example, the network could receive a number 8 but guess that it's a number 2. In order to actually teach or train our AIs to perform a given task, we need to decide on what method would be best to do so. Two very famous examples are supervised learning or reinforcement learning, but there are also many more. In supervised learning, the AI learns from labeled examples or data. The AI makes a guess, then it checks the data to see if its guess was correct or not. And then we update the neural network to be more correct for the next input. The key takeaway here is that we are having the AI learn from examples, and the more examples we have, the better. In reinforcement learning, an AI learns from interactions with its environment. First, the AI performs some action and then checks the state of its environment. In chess, we would say that moving a piece is an action and the resulting board is a state. The AI receives some reward, which we can view as positive or negative feedback. Then we update the neural network to take actions that maximize that reward. Unlike supervised learning, which learns by example, AIs trained using reinforcement learning do not learn from examples we provided, but instead from interacting with an environment. So how does an AI view the world? AIs view the world very differently from how we do. So we can't fall into the trap of projecting human qualities and intentions onto them so easily. Let's see one last example of how this is done. Mathias Babin is a student at the University of Western working on his PhD in the field of artificial intelligence research and computer science. Here, He will provide an overview of a simulation he is creating to demonstrate how AIs think and learn.
Okay, thank you very much. So, this is the first environment that we built for this project. The goal here is we want to show how AIs actually see the world, because we don't really appreciate how differently this can be done. Let's see this firsthand. Here is an environment that would be somewhat like the view of the AI. We have essentially 3 numbers on screen, okay? This is what the AI sees. Do we have, based off this information alone, any idea of what this task possibly is? It's pretty hard to say, right? So I'm gonna flash through a number of these and we'll see. Let's go to another environment, okay? Let's try this one. This is a bit more understandable for us, okay? We have this little robot, it moves around, there's some type of grid, and it can end up interacting with it, okay? Still though, if I had to ask you, what is this machine actually doing? Like, what task is it actually solving? It's a little more understandable, right? But the representation is still a bit abstract. So we can move into something that is hopefully understandable. Now we have it on this grid of grass, and the robot sits down and it plants what's a sapling, right? This is something that we understand, right? And all 3 of these tasks are actually identical, okay? We go from this vector of just 3 values, okay? We'll go back to it. What we have here, okay, is the first 2 positions are the robot's position on XY coordinate, and then that last number at the end is what kind of square it's standing on, okay? So all of these tasks, and if you don't believe me, I can pause it and show you that our little robot is right there. As I move around on the grid, he's right there, and whenever I plant, I put down an object, okay? So all 3 environments are literally the same. However, all the AI sees of this world are these 3 values. So this is kind of the first glimpse we have at how differently we view a task versus the AI solves the task, okay? With this, the AI can actually solve this environment. It will learn to plant trees in optimal soil. That's why we have these 3 different terrain types. They end up mapping to, let me go back to the full example here. These end up mapping to different soil grades, where down here, it might be a little hard to see on the screen, but we have some rocks and we have different qualities of soil. In this case, the AI's task was learn to plant trees in the most fertile ground possible, okay? And the AI actually can solve this task with just that limited representation of numbers. But the main reason, again, we have this is that we want to show, okay, we like projecting all these qualities onto the AI, but the AI's world and our world are very different, and it's actually slightly remarkable that this is all the information the AI requires to do its task. And on top of that, it doesn't even know what the task is. It has no concept of what trees are, what grass is, and it doesn't actually need a lot of that information to solve its task. So that's the first little glimpse of what this little demo was supposed to show us, right? The next bit is, how is this thing actually learning? We talked about it a little bit in the video, these different modalities of learning that AI has. But in this instance, we use something called reinforcement learning, which is the AI just tries things in the environment. It just tries things and it gets some type of feedback. This is actually a very intuitive mode of learning for us. If you put your hand on a hot stove, you're gonna burn yourself and you're gonna learn very quickly not to do that again. This would be like giving the AI a negative reward when it does an action we don't want it to do. So in our case, this would be the AI planting in soil that's not good for the tree. But we can also give it a positive reward, giving it like a good job when it does something that we want it to do. But actually, this would maybe be a good time to show this. I'll show what the AI's behavior looks like when it's in control versus me. And there's something interesting to see here, right? The AI kind of flickers around. If you watch the little robot, when he goes to plant these objects, he kind of flickers around, right? Because to the AI, again, it doesn't know what the task is or its environment is. There's no penalty for it to behave this way. The reward structure we gave it is simply, can you plant in the best soil possible? So it took random actions and learned to do that, but there's nothing stopping it from doing this little kind of dance he does when he goes to each area. So this is something else we have to do as like AI designers. We have to be very careful and explicit about how we define these rewards for it. So if I think like, okay, that's not good behavior, maybe I will penalize him for each action that he takes. So he actually has to learn two things. Okay, plant trees in the right area, but also let me minimize how many actions I take, so I'm not wasting them on these little flickers. So that's the first thing here, this little introductory piece of software. Do you mind, Jodie, if I show the other one as well? Great. Okay, so now we move on from that to another kind of more advanced environment. Okay? This one, we have two agents in. It might be a little hard to see right now. We'll just let them run, and you can see them move. So we have two little robots that move around this world. One is tasked as a fisherman, and the other is tasked as a farmer. So what does this exactly mean? There's two places where you can either gather crops or gather fish. Okay? One is proficient at the task of gathering fish. The other is proficient at the task of farming. So your proficiency means how much you can yield from it. If the fisherman tries to farm, he won't be that good at it, but he will get some crop. Likewise, if the farmer tries to fish, he'll get some fish, but he's, again, not very fast at it. What these agents are trying to do is only survive. So their reward in this case is how long can you live? And how they live is by having some crop and some fish. But these go down over time. Their stash, how much they have, you can think of them almost as eating these things, goes down. And if it ever hits zero, they die. Okay? But there's more complexity to this environment because they can end up overfishing or they can end up over-farming. If you fish all the fish out of an area, that pond will have no more fish in it ever again. Likewise for the field, if you completely harvest everything, nothing can reproduce. Okay? So what these agents do is they run around this environment, they fish and they farm. We add one last complexity to this, which is we add a trading post. The AIs are also allowed to trade resources with one another at this post. Okay? So I know there's a lot of dynamics at play, but what emerges is very interesting. So the only goal they have is to survive. And what we find is the AIs not only don't overfish, they don't overfarm, but they also learn to share resources with one another because they use their proficiencies and they only do that task. You will never see the fisherman ever try to farm. You will never see the farmer try to fish. They only do their task because they're proficient at it, and they end up trading for the other resource that they're missing. And what's pretty remarkable about this is that we don't tell the AI to do any of this. This is all emergent behavior. All we say are your possible actions are go farm here, go farm there, go fish here, go fish there, or trade at the trading post. Those are the only actions they're allowed to take, and then their goal is to survive. All of that other behavior is just emergent. This is kind of going back to that chess analogy that we had. We could tell an AI manually how to play chess. Oh, when the board looks like this, this is a pretty good move. Or when it looks like this, this is a pretty good move. That's not the same thing that machine learning is doing. We're saying, here's a chessboard, learn to play chess on your own. That's what this is. This is learn to survive on your own. And what we see emerge is a lot of principles that end up lining up with a lot of these indigenous values about not over-consuming on the land, sharing with your neighbors, etc. So that was kind of the next step in this whole process that we have. Yeah, do we have a question if you want to jump in?
Yeah, so how does it know that a reward is a reward if it's only recognizing numbers?
So, well, that is like another, so currently when the AI is fully trained, we can kind of throw out the reward mechanism because we know the reward mechanism is there for the actual training process of the AI. So what it will do is it will take an action and then it will say, okay, based on this action, here's the reward you get back. Now, it gets a little more complicated as we go further along. Like for chess, what is the reward for chess? Turns out what we do is we let the AI play a full game of chess. It gets a reward of 0 if it lost, or it gets a reward of 1 if it won. Right? Here, its reward is actually in the top corner. It's that number right there that ticks up by 1 value every second. So we've been running the simulation for 270 some odd seconds. That's its reward. So the longer it survives, the more that number goes up, the better it has done at surviving. So initially, they lasted maybe like 10 seconds doing just random actions. They just overfished, they gathered everything for themselves, and then they died. But then slowly they learned the trading post, slowly they learned to fish in the right areas, they never overfish. And this is, again, emergent behavior, right? So this is, again, another step in the right direction. Everything I've talked about is really just in the realm of AI, but now we start seeing a little bit of overlap with those indigenous values. So the last demo we have is, it's still a work in progress, so it's not completely there yet. Actually, there's some updates that have been done to it that even Ray and Jodie haven't seen yet. But what this environment is this is like our quote-unquote like hunting simulator, and you're kind of on this boat ride, and there's different animals, and you can view them, and then Ray will come and he'll talk to you, and he'll tell you about said animal. And that's where we've worked in a few of these like indigenous knowledge systems, but the plan for this system is going to be a different mode of learning. So what I've told you about so far is reinforcement learning, where we have that reward mechanism that's coming in, and the AI is learning good for bad, and the behavior emerges. This is a different system that we're building here. This is going to be an imitation learning system. So here, the AI learns from like a human master, like a master as in like proficient at the task. Kind of like you have a teacher and student. So in this modality, we have a human player that will do whatever actions, and then based on those actions, the AI will learn from them and will try and emulate those actions. So here we're trying to show, because this is another going back to the indigenous knowledge systems, we have this idea of you're teaching your children, you're teaching your kids how to hunt, how to fish, how to gather, right? And we're showing that this is also an effective mechanism for training an AI. That there is like a little bit of overlap here actually in terms of how we convey knowledge, and we can do the exact same thing with AI-based systems. So again, this one is still in development. We hope we'll have it done probably by the end of the month or so. The AI is actually currently at my house training off of my data. These are kind of the main systems that we have in place right now. Sorry if I'm also talking too much. If anyone, I know we normally don't like taking questions, but if anyone has questions about these things, feel more than free to ask me about it now or after. I love showing these things off. So these are like the first 3 kind of examples that we have. Yeah, so if there's nothing else right now, I can turn it back over to you, Jodie.
Virtual sensors that these devices, these robots
Y- Great. So the question is, are there any type of virtual sensors that these things rely on? And the answer is absolutely. So in this example with the imitation learning, there actually won't be, because it doesn't need any. It just, I say given, not exactly true, because we do need to know the state of the environment in some capacity. So yeah, basically for these ones, it's given the state of the environment, which we will need sensors for, this is the action I would want to do, and then this is the action that was taken by like the master or the human in this case. And then does my action line up, yes or no? This is actually pretty similar to the example we saw with recognizing the hand digit as number 8. First, the AI will look at that number and think, oh, is that a number 2? Which is incorrect. And then we say, no, it's actually a number 8. And then it will try and adjust itself for next time. Here, it will take an action. If that action lines up with mine, we won't have to update really anything because it was correct. But if it's wrong, we should update it. Now, in the other examples where we had that reward function going on, again, we will need some type of virtual sensors, right? So in my environment, I got away with just giving it the X and Y position of it. But if we had to have this AI, I don't know, navigate around walls or anything of the matter, we would start measuring the distance between it and other objects it might have to avoid, and we'll report that back to the AI. So this is all what we call like the state or observation space of the AI. So absolutely we will. Yeah.
So for the first, the reinforced say.
Yeah. So the question there was, in that environment we saw with the fishing, how long did it take for them to learn that kind of behavior, and was there any type of like infighting that occurred? And the answer is, when we have to report like the training times for these things, there's 2 ways we can kind of go about it. We can talk about how many attempts or iterations these things took to learn. So it could take, I don't know, anywhere between 10,000, 100,000, a million iterations for them to learn this. Because again, when we think back to that first example, we have a lot of like higher level representations of like what we're doing in terms of fishing and farming and all these other things built in. They just have numbers. So it takes them a long time and a lot of tries, just as I would say probably we would. If we were only given these numbers, how many tries would it take us to kind of figure out what's going on? So in this case, it took, I think the training time was around 15,000 episodes, so that's 15,000 attempts to start getting some semblance of good behavior. The actual time it takes to train will depend on how powerful your computer is. I have a powerful one at home that can churn through that in maybe 5 to 8 hours for them to learn that, which again is actually another fascinating thing about AI, not to digress, is that we can say with a powerful enough like distributed system of computers, play 2 million games of chess and it will do it in like an hour, right? That they can gather this experience remarkably kind of fast because of how fast they can simulate these environments. So again, they kind of learned to share over 15,000. And to answer the question of infighting, there absolutely was, in the sense of they actually don't even know that each other actually exists, in a sense, because I don't pass that information between each other. They only have information, again, of like where they are and like what they can do and how many resources are left at each location. So the other doesn't even know each other exists. But what they do see is, oh, randomly some stuff showed up at the trading post, which again, we're putting this abstract representation on it. They just saw a number flip, and that number happens to correlate to how many fish or crop are in the shop, and it goes, great, I can get that there. And then, so initially, yeah, they would just out-farm, out-fish each other till nothing was left and they would inevitably die. But as more iterations evolved, they learned first only do my task, and then they learned kind of the trading post, and then the whole thing kind of stabilized to the fact that now they can just live forever.
So the trading post, that knowledge is kind of shared or recognized, right? They see you
Yes.
in inventory. So
Yes.
the dog might where I came
They don't care, they don't need to know where it came from, right? They just, yes. To them, it's another pond to them. They see how many fish are in each pond, how many crop are in each field, and how many of each are at the trading post. So it's almost another place to gather resources from. But when they interact with that specific thing, they have to trade there. So if they want a crop, they have to give a fish. And that is kind of abstracted from it. It just says, like, do you want to do the trading post action? And then we handle all the kind of logic for that. But they don't even have to necessarily control their movement. And when you see them perform, they weren't doing that kind of fidgety dance that the other one was doing, because in this environment, we didn't give it control over where to move. We just said, do you want to go here? Do you want to go here? Do you want to go here? And then the computer handles actually navigating them there. But so we can even see with that action how we can control different elements of it.
So all three of these models are reinforcement AI. Are we still in the same category?
Okay, sorry, I should be repeating the questions. So the question was, are all of these models instances of reinforcement learning? The planting robot is reinforcement learning, the fisher and farmer are reinforcement learning, but this last one we're building that's going to copy actions is an instance of imitation learning, because it's imitating our actions.
And when we were developing all this, the very first thing he said was trade. And as that, okay, I can talk to this. And what I brought up was the dish with one spoon. So dakwa is what we call it. In that, if you're not familiar with it, it was a wampum developed between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, because we were going into each other's hunting areas. And to boil it down was that if there was going to be trade with another nation, we had to sit with them. Because there's things on that side we needed, and maybe there's things on this side they needed. So from there, I gave him the whole history of where that came from. It's not just a dish, it was actually a feast. And that feast was beaver tail. In that beaver tail, we would share that. And if we were in the Anishinaabe land, we would say, we don't have this much, what can you provide us? And they would say, you can take this much here, take this much here, but the rest is for our people. And that was reciprocated back. If they came into our land, same thing with that dish, beaver tail, we lay out, this is what you can take. So that part of that trade was there. Later on, it transformed into the Europeans coming here to trade. The fur trade, beaver tail trade, all of that. And so there was something that they needed, there was something we needed. So when I spoke to that, he said, oh, it fits on what they were doing. So they were going to the trading post. Yeah, that came later on. We had the first GST, if you said good in sales tax, because there was something we had to trade for that. Not only that, but understanding how other people came here, then I spoke about the Turo wampum. Go swonta. Go swonta is what you lay in front. It has nothing to do with what talking about the 2 rows there yet. That we lay this out as an agreement. Do you agree to this natural way of life? Then when we turn it, yoha that these 2 equal paths, we can learn from each other. From not learning whatever it is that you need, we will help you with, but we will not interfere in your life, as we're asking of that of you as well. Don't interfere in our life. We can learn from each other, travel with each other, but that's it. So when we extended that out, in the moral of that part is, why has it dropped? Why are we the only ones holding on to that agreement? So this type of education, when we're talking about the perspective of our people, there's a lot of history in there that has to go forth in that, so he gets the idea. There is our own wampum that we created together of learning about each other. There is the Indigenous perspective, and I wanted to add that when he was saying trade. So we can develop that, but we also have that teaching to our kids, show them this is why we developed that.
So that's what I was saying before when we were playing around with these and when we had that meeting and Mathias was showing us the outcome of that simulation with these two AIs that knew nothing about what they were doing or with each other and came to determine that the best way to survive is not overtaking, living sustainably, sharing. And so when we think about these principles that we're trying to bring forward, this is what kept, like the land here, the water, you could go to any river and drink right from the river. Can we do that today? No. So that's what I mean by I'm not actually afraid of AI, because if it's going to do what Mathias just showed us, I think we're actually in a better situation in those, if that's going to be our outcomes. Because like I said, like this points to this bigger problem that we need to be thinking about, which is abrupt climate change. And you know, we don't have we might be able to get water treatment plants for humans, but what about the animals? Like, why don't they get to have clean water? And we won't even get into which humans get clean water and which humans don't in this presentation, but that's a whole other session. But so that's a little bit about, you know, these projects that we've been working on. So we're going to have a little our first question, which you can use your phone. So you can hold your phone up on the QR code, and you'll see on the Padlet when it pops up on your device, there's you can add under the first column there for question number 1. So, you know, and maybe you don't have any questions or wonderings at this point, but if you do, we'll just take a minute to let you think about those right now. Okay, so I see like there's comments and questions coming in, so we'll circle back to those. So you can keep putting in your questions as we kind of go along, and we'll come back to those. So Ray already mentioned these. So let's see who is listening. So does anybody here know what this is, or what it's called? Yeah? Yes, the two-row wampum. Okay, so can anybody describe what they know about it? Okay, yep.
It represents two nations, two people traveling in their independent boats, their paths, and allowing each to be sovereign, traveling together, but not interfering with the trajectory of each.
Yeah, exactly. So the sharing was, sorry, I forgot, we don't have microphones. So the idea of two nations living separately and not interfering with each other. Did you want to add on?
Mine was more general. I
Yep.
recently learned that they are living. If you have life, the wampums.
Yeah, so the comment here was that they're living, wampums are living, they're living agreements. And then I saw hands up over here. Somebody want to add on? Anyone else? Okay, and then we have this one here. Anyone recognize this one? Yep.
One dish, one spoon.
Okay, so one dish, one spoon, or dish with one spoon, wampum. And what do some people know about this? What is this one about? You should have a hint because Ray just talked about it. You want to add? Yeah, keep going.
It represents kind of the earth and everything that's in it, and there's you take what you need, and then you pass the spoon on.
Mm-hmm.
That way, so the person next to you can take what they need, and it keeps being passed, and so you share it respectfully.
Yeah, so the comment is that this idea is that the dish represents the earth, and that we are to be sharing, not overtaking, and that the spoon is to be passed along. So I like to explain it like, let's say we're all very, very hungry, and I have one pot of soup. It can feed us all, but it just has that one ladle. So in order to make sure we all get fed, we have to do that with kindness. We have to do that with compassion. We have to be, careful about how, like, I'm not just giving it all to George and then there's nothing left for anybody else. That we're not taking too much. And so this is a very simplified, pared down version of this, because if you were to understand these wampums and their full agreements, it actually would take days to orate the incredible history and knowledge and governing systems that come with this. And so when people were starting to arrive here, these agreements were set up, and a little fact, some people think that treaty making is a European thing. It's not. It's actually an Indigenous contribution, because nations here were doing treaty agreements and wampums encoded in wampum, like way before anybody came over here. And so this was a contribution gifted to other people. But this idea is, if you're going to come and live in our lands, then we have rules, right? Like, if you're going to come over to my house, I might ask you to take your shoes off, because that, maybe I just clean the floor. Don't want to mess it up. And so there's these agreements, but something went wrong, terribly wrong. Greed came into the picture. And so very quickly we went from these agreements that are still on the books. These are still legally recognized. They're international laws because it's nation to nation. And so fast forward, what ends up happening is we have this, through greed, people saw that when they come into these lands, they're like, whoa, there is like money to be had. Because what fuels our economy? Resources. Today they look like, earlier on they looked like furs. Today they look like oil, timber, minerals, lithium, fresh water, a lot of money to be had. And so because of greed, this agreement that people had went from, yes, we're going to abide by your rules living into these lands, to we want to have everything, and we will create horrible genocidal laws to get rid of you, to either what the government says, assimilate into the Canadian politics, so you will no longer be sovereign nations, you'll all be Canadians, or to just outright eradicate. And so this has been this awful story of Canada, and it's important that we tie it into this, because if we're going to talk about ideas of moving forward with sustainability and solutions to climate change, because this behavior, this colonial behavior that's fueled by industry and greed just to make a lot of money off of the resources, is what's driving climate change. There's a direct connection between the displacement of Indigenous peoples off their lands for this awful take, and now we are facing abrupt climate change. So we have to understand this. When we talk about erasure, right, like going back thinking about the map, why would the government, through education, completely erase us off maps when Canada itself actually can't produce title to the land? Think about it. Most of the land mass is actually tied up in treaties. Nation-to-nation agreements about land sharing. Not, hey, come take everything, just have at it. We're just going to go over here and die off in a corner. Like, that's ridiculous. Of course not. This was always about land sharing. And so Canada has a little bit of a conundrum, because, people weren't supposed to be existing in 2024. But thankfully, people are still here. And so we have to reconcile this fact. And so again, like, if you can stay on the Padlet if you still have it open. And if you don't have it open, you can use the QR code again. And you'll just have to kind of, with your finger on your screen, swipe to the left, like right to left. And then you'll see the next set of questions. And we're just going to pause here. I'm going to give you a few minutes in your table groups. Those who are online can also add in on the Padlet. But I just want to have some discussion around this, and then we'll take a little break and we'll move into the next section. But I want you to think about this. That again, this idea of that treaties were to be about, and still are, Like they have not gone away. Like the laws are still the law. It's just that Canada just doesn't follow its own laws. So it's not that it's not there. It's just that we have this government right now, and always have, regardless of who's in power, this blatant ignoring of these laws and treaty agreements. And this idea of guardianship, of having a say over what's going on in the shared lands, has to be recognized by, that jurisdiction has to be recognized. So the first question here is, in what ways can we ensure the government abides by the legal agreements outlined in the treaties? So in your positions of whatever you do, whatever work capacity you're in, how are you gonna help with that? What are you gonna do? In what ways can we support giving land back to Indigenous peoples, communities, and/or nations? Like, even the federal government has said, yeah, we have to do land back. And land back can be a variety of things. And sometimes I like to look at it also as like just removing this false title of Crown land, maybe just removing it, because it's kind of a, it's an interesting fictitious title. And then the last question is, in what ways can we ensure Indigenous peoples have jurisdiction and decision-making powers over what happens in their territories? That's the big one. It kind of connects back to the discussions we were having before. Who's making decisions? So if we think about in education, who writes the curriculum? We have all this new curriculum about Indigenous peoples and learning about all the different things, but do we know if Indigenous peoples are at those tables? The Ontario College of Teachers, that creates the guidelines and the standards for faculties of education. Who do you think is at those decision-making tables? In the capacity that you work at, how are you making sure that Indigenous peoples are at those tables? So think about that, talk about that, and then we'll take a break. And then we'll resume with what you guys have talked about. So we'll leave you there for about 5 minutes or so to chat. These are some tough questions, right? But these are the questions that we need to be having and we need to be thinking about if we're going to be working and moving forward in any area, whether it's in AI or any particular area, is we have to address these things first. Does anybody want to share maybe some of the conversations, maybe like any of the challenges, anything that people were having?
Yeah. The feeling I think we'll have collectively is that we sense that AI is bringing forth a moment in time of significant change in the way we handle economies, legal systems, communication, nation building, literally. And this is a chance where we ought to invite First Nations to the table actively, because it could distance us yet even further from where we ought to be today with First Nations. We have to invite to the table expertise in First Nations worldviews, expertise in First Nations desire to participate with us, and have them be true partners in the revolution that AI is going to bring forward. It's a chance we can't afford to miss. We need to have that kind of involvement, so that we are truly working as partners. That's what the research that Mathias is demonstrating to us, right? It doesn't have to be left to coincidence. He's demonstrated, quite frankly, how we have capacity here, technical capacity, but that's not the only answer, clearly. But it is this wave of change that's coming forward, driven by technology, that can help us do better when it comes to bringing First Nations to the table in a fair, equitable manner, and answering these questions in a more accountable way, because we can, let's face it, as I mentioned earlier today, AI can bring on rebellion because we're not governed anymore. In fact, there was a message yesterday about AI. One of our speakers is pointing out that you're not welcome to our world vis-a-vis in relation to government, because in the world of gaming, we are sovereign. law does not apply to us, right, in the virtual reality, right? That's what technology can do. That's what improved communication can do. It can bring about wholesale change in established structures, right? And we're in that moment right now. And we can answer these questions more fairly and be more accountable to them with what lies ahead of us. That's my feeling right now.
Just leave the microphone here. Does anybody else want to share anything? These are really important discussions, and I just want to, just something to kind of think about is even in like the choice of language about rather than inviting people to our tables, maybe going to the tables, right? So even thinking about, we have to remember Indigenous peoples come from their own nations and have their own tables, their own ways of doing things. And if you're not part of those nations, then you're a guest. And so you have to go to their tables, and we have to make the space for those tables to exist in our structures.
Thank you. My question or comment in the discussion we were having here is about understanding protocol and ceremony, and that just because we don't want to take the responsibility to do the heavy lifting, to have these conversations and do this work and decolonize our teaching, that when we do enter into spaces to invite elders, knowledge keepers to support us, or how should we move, is to recognize they don't have to, is that right of refusal, that it may not be the right time, and just because they say no now doesn't mean it's no forever, but it starts with taking that time to build a relationship, and that if and when that relationship is established, the protocol of that sharing, of when that knowledge is being shared, that there's a gifting, and it's because there was a sharing of an experience where a high table organization asked us to do this work with no consideration for what will we give to honor this sharing of Indigenous knowledge for the work. So it's not just saying that there is a way of doing things, but doing things in a right and a good way by understanding the ceremony and the practices of the Indigenous nation, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples that you're working with. Thank you.
We've had to make a lot of big changes in our school board that just kind of makes me think about like recognition and compensation. So, when people are elders or somebody who shares their knowledge, do we look at it in the same way as we look at PhDs? Because it is on par with that. You can't find this knowledge in a book. It's pretty, hard to find. And so how do we recognize that? Because that's another thing that happens often. And again, I'm just speaking from my experience in the provincial K-12 education spheres, is that we pay people in the same way that if we're going to bring somebody in to speak, about math, if we bring a PhD in to speak about math and we pay them $5,000, we pay the same for somebody who holds that same knowledge. We compensate them in the same way. And then the other thing too on that you made me think about is, because you mentioned about the power of saying no, is that people have the authority to say no, and no does not mean negotiate, because I see that happening all the time. You get a no, and then there's some kind of like debate or negotiation that goes on, and it's like, nope. So we actually created a policy in our board that's very, very explicit of what the expectations are happening in schools and what are not happening in schools. And if we say you can't do this, it means that means you can't do that. And then there's a consequence, like how you would consequence a 2-year-old when you tell them no, and then they try and do it again. Anyway. Ray, did you want to add to this conversation?
So the part I want to address first is decolonization. To our people, they have to decolonize themselves first. In that way that it goes forward. So that it's a lot easier to meet in the middle. When we decolonize ourselves, we're purifying on what we're letting go of. So that's one part I want to put in there. The other one is that when you're going to see a grandma or grandpa, a knowledge sharer, be very clear of what your intentions are before they say no. Because if you're just saying, can you come in and speak about this? Of course they're going to say no. Because you're not giving them any other details of part of that. And if you are experienced and know, then take a gift as showing that you are really there for that reason. Sometimes it's not always tobacco. I remember a grandma one time, she said, well, how am I supposed to eat this? It's a teaching. There's a learning involved. So you take food, sort of smooth it out, and then lay out what your intentions are. Then you add that tobacco to them. And then you say in that tobacco, as this gift, whatever knowledge you can share at any time, please allow that to happen. Then they'll decide. But if you get no, it's because you didn't go there with that intention. You went there and you start laying out all these things. Well, I want you to go to K to 12, and I want you to go to this school and go to that school, and then we'll give you something. Well, that's so much for them to digest. So think about it that way, that you're going there with a pure heart, clear mind. And always have extra gifts in there. Because that is what they're going to want. Some places, they don't take money. And Jodie knows that. Some places they'll take cloth. They'll take other medicines. Because that's what they need. So you got to think outside of the boxes. Sometimes they can't get out. They can't utilize money. So they have to utilize what is there in the community. So I just wanted to add that part in there. And that learning as you're going forward, always ask somebody within the community, I'm going to see this person. What can we do to help? Because that goes even further.
Thank you, Ray. So if we always think about those principles of reciprocity, so we never take anything without giving something in return. And so it's always like getting into that practice, right? And when we come here, like this is us giving our time. You can't put a price tag on time. You know, we've all taken time away from our families, our children, our responsibilities. When we come, whether it's here or in other capacities, it's a recognition of that time. Even if I go to visit Ray, you know, he's giving his time to me. And so it's just another way to shift and think about those things, because again, on the Western side and in our educational spaces, we often don't think about that in that same exchange. So in this next section, we're going to shift into okay, so we've talked about so far these concepts of these Indigenous knowledge systems, the concepts of what I just mentioned, right? Reciprocity. Part of my family comes from the Anishinaabe Nation, and so my understandings are more from there. So we say Begijigan is our offerings. So we always are thinking about offerings. Like it's at the forefront of everything we do is what do we give? And it's interesting because what was one of the laws that got put into place, because if you think about, sorry, I'm going to back up. If you think about, if your worldview, if you've only been raised to think about giving and giving away, and the more you accumulate is actually terrible. Like that's the worst thing, is to acquire things. So if that's your worldview, and it's a good leader gives away, gives back to the community, making sure nobody gets left behind. There's an equal distribution of wealth. No wonder they made that illegal. Because imagine if everybody thought that way. Wouldn't we be in a little bit of a different place if that's how we were thinking, first and foremost? And so all of these really awful legislative and laws were all to chip away at these foundational values around this deep connection with the land. And that's what everybody, again, like Ray was saying earlier, it doesn't matter where you're from, you're actually Indigenous to some place, somewhere. Maybe it's from here, but everybody comes from a land, a language, and a deep connection to that. So we all have to get back to that, because doomsday's coming. with climate change if we're not already here. So here's some examples, like really interesting examples about, you know, AI. We all kind of talked about the incredible speed at which things can happen, and so there's all kinds of really awesome things happening, like using, looking at how to map Earth's forests when we're talking about deforestation, you know, looking at ways that, how do we reduce our waste in different ways, you know, some really fascinating stuff coming out of these projects. Cleaning up the ocean, and again, like these detailed maps of ocean litter, and then how to go about dealing with that. So amazing things that are happening. But on our website, because you'll see up here, the ai-ed.ca, so we have a few articles, and the difference between some of these initiatives versus some of the initiatives where Indigenous peoples and communities are at the center. It gets a little bit, it's just a little bit better. Because remember, depending on where you are, so in this part of the land, it's people that, like Ray, that would have knowledge about, you know, plant medicine, or how things grow in certain ways, or how we're supposed to interact with the environment, how we're understanding the cycles here. If you were to go up north, you would, you know, it would be different up there. So the people from, you know, the land know what's best in how to work with the land. So in here we have like some examples in this article that's posted, right? Like there's an interesting partnership coming out of working with in reef restoration, looking at how to look at AI combining with traditional knowledge, when looking at places that have, you know, these large, vast spaces. In this case, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Kakadu National Park in Australia. So there's this really invasive weed that's really problematic, and so they've partnered up, and already it's the magpie geese population has gone from just 50 to 1,800 birds. Like these are just these tiny little examples of, would this have the same outcome without working with traditional ecological knowledge in those places? I don't think so. How could it? You're missing an important piece of the puzzle. So in this one here, a northern tribe, or in northern Brazil, work to, because they're constantly in the Amazon combating deforestation. And, you know, just on a side note, do you know who the worst mining companies in the world are that are going into all over the different places around the world, especially in South America? Canadian companies. Like horrible, horrible, horrible human rights violations, like in the worst possible ways. And it's Canadian mining companies. So what does that say about Canadians? Don't you think Canadians should like maybe say that's wrong? Maybe look for ways to hold Canadian companies accountable? Anyway, in this example here, so this was to build these like notifications. So whenever there was chainsaws like chainsaw noise, the leaders of the tribes could be notified so that they could go out and try and stop that from happening. But you know, this is one example of the sad reality, and this is what we can't forget about, is that, remember what I was saying, colonization is still very active, especially right here, right now, on these lands right here in Canada, like active. And so this particular tribe, there's, you know, they constantly are facing ongoing violence, murder, and we see this echoed all over the place. Even the Vatican put out a statement about how many leaders have been killed simply by saying, like, no, you can't do this. It's not good for anybody, for the sake of a little profit, for a little piece of time. And if we think about right here on these lands, you know, you can see the tar sands from space. Like, it's not a good idea that we're doing out in Alberta. And if you look at any extractive company that's working right now throughout Canada, there's always a First Nation that's bumped up against them that is suffering catastrophic impacts of it. Whether it's Victor Diamond Mine in Attawapiskat, whether it's mercury poisoning in Grassy Narrows and White Dog First Nation, whether it's the pipelines going through traditional lands out west, like every single one has environmental major repercussions, but also to the people that are right next. And then I want you to think about how much money is being taken out. Let's just talk about the diamonds for a minute. How much money do you think has diamond companies made taking diamonds out? Trillions? Like, I can't even fathom it. And so how is it fair that the communities right beside them are getting completely annihilated? Not to mention, did the companies even have permission to be digging into the land that's not theirs? That's a whole other piece. But again, we have to be, we can't pretend that this isn't happening. And so this is why, again, something you might want to look into, it's posted on the website there, is these conversations that we were just having today is even around this understanding of how our worldview is shaped and how we think about things. We talked about, the power of language earlier, and I wish one of the elders I work with, Deahande, I forget the word in Mohawk, I don't know if there's one for Oneida, but the word for rain, he said means it's visibly precious. And he told me this because I was complaining about the rain, because I'm such a complainer. I was like, oh, it's been raining for days, and it's so drizzly out, and I just want the sun, and I'm just tired of the rain. And so he's like, well, in our language, this word means it's visibly precious. Now, if that's all I ever thought about in terms of the rain, would I be complaining so much if every time I saw the rain, that instead of saying rain, the word was like, it's visibly precious? So language is so, so critically important as well, because it shapes our understanding of our relationship with the environment. So we also showed earlier on this project that we have been working on together. And I just want to invite Mathias back up here for a minute, and Ray, and then we'll have another little discussion to talk about, to hear, we did a video interview about this as well, but just to share how this partnership and working together and how it changed or impacted how you are moving forward in your work.
Yeah, so this was, as I said before, the third project that we worked on together. It's still the one that's under development. And the thing here was, this is where we really started kind of bouncing ideas back and forth with one another on how can we further look at these value systems, and then how can we make analogies with how AI learns. And the process itself was very rewarding of, I would iteratively do something, I would come back to Ray could say, hey, that's really great, how could we involve something like this, and then we'd go back and forth quite a few times, and then we kind of narrowed in on what the vision for this project will be. And as I said, still ongoing, but maybe we can hear a bit from Ray on your side of things. And
So when he came to me and he showed me, he had a canoe in the water. And he says, this is where we go and hunt. This is where this is at. And I visualized and I saw bigger things. And I said, he only had a deer. I said, that's not all we hunted. We hunted raccoon, squirrels, muskrats. He says, oh, okay. And then as he said, every time we came back, there was something, another piece. I said, but we only did this in the wintertime. So he had to change the scenario. I said, but I like what you had here. We can use that as fishing. And then Jodie came in and she says, what would the words be if they were to stop and look at a deer? I said, oh. So we would later add that in there. Or skanond, we would put that as in for deer. Or lanyatalatsa, he's fishing. So all of that was all coming forward. And then I had the bigger idea. I said, can you zoom out? Oh yeah, it was like nothing. I said, can you zoom out and make it look like a turtle? Ooh. He says, I like where you're going with this, Ray. So all of that is, I was tapping into his enormous strength in that. So I'm looking forward to that, where they open up this project and the very first thing to see is a turtle, because we call it Turtle Island. And then you zoom in right into the village where we're beginning. And it is open to anything, any language that is out there, to decipher how they say these animals and what system they're using. So it doesn't mean that this is because I'm working on it and it's only Haudenosaunee done. It could be done in Cree, in Anishinaabe, whatever they speak, and they can add to that. Well, in our area, this is what we would say and this is what we would do. That is what we're trying to enhance, what we're trying to get across. So when at the first beginning, struggled with it, but now we're into this where I visualize this as being a game. Can we transform that and have the kids play this game of how much fish can you gather within this time period? What plants are you planting that is within this area? So when you work together like this and you have that knowledge of both sides connecting, it's such a beautiful thing.
And to touch on this, one last thing I want to say is that with a lot of these AIs that we're training or the environments that we're making, a lot of the AI's behavior will be based on what we as the developers of the AI almost tell it to do, either directly or indirectly. So before I talked a little bit about these reward systems that the AI has, giving it a different reward system will result in completely different behavior from these AI. So in this case, because I'm collaborating with Ray, we can work on projects that steer AI in the right direction. I can show you hundreds of instances of where, I don't know, the military is developing something and their AI is doing something less than constructive, right? So the idea is that it's really down to us as people that are guiding these AI systems in one direction or another. And this is just an instance here of how this collaboration is something that we view as like a constructive outlet. And that's one of the key takeaways here that I think is important to impart to everybody, is that with these AI systems, yes, they're powerful, yes, they can do these amazing things, but it's really a reflection of us and what we want to achieve with them, right? So that's kind of the main takeaway from this. And there are a few questions.
I just wanted to add, can you clarify at this point the thing that I was asking you, the second example that you showed?
Right. So the question here is in that example I showed earlier with the two bots collaborating with one another, is this something I prompted it to do, or what kind of led to this emergent behavior? And the simplest answer is that no, as a developer of this, I have no direct input in terms of me prompting the AIs on what they should do. Now, however, in this environment, because I think you asked another question before was this random? Would this happen every time? In this environment, what we call the optimal policy, so this is how the AIs behave optimally. The optimal solution for this environment is that they will collaborate. So every time we train this, if you train it well and you converge to the optimal policy, it will state that they will always collaborate with one another. Now, the caveat to this is that that's what this environment's optimal strategy looks like. We can extend the environment if we want, and maybe something else emerges. We can give the AIs more action. Let's say we don't extend the environment other than the AIs are now allowed, let's say, to attack each other, okay? In this case, the optimal policy will still be to collaborate, because maybe from the perspective of each AI, sometimes the fisher will win fighting against the other one. Sometimes it won't, right? So if the whole goal is still to survive as long as possible, it's not actually advantageous to attack each other. So just the implementation or the addition of new actions won't always lead to new behavior. Now, we could keep changing this scenario however we want. Well, maybe there's a limited number of resources, right? Now, how does that change things? So, yes, the behavior of the AI will not always be about collaboration, depending on what the environment is. But in this instance, we made an environment that it's possible to have it be sustainable, right? The analogy would be that our planet as we currently have it could be always sustainable, right? We have enough resources to presumably go around, right? In some cases, yeah?
When you said, like you started your answer by...
So what I'm saying is, so the policy is what the AI learns. The policy is another word for the AI's behavior. So in this case, the optimal behavior, so what the policy leads to is ultimately a reward. So our reward is how long you survived for. So the optimal policy achieves the most reward. So for the AIs to achieve that to learn that optimal policy, collaboration happens to work here. So again, I didn't say, hey, you guys should collaborate. That completely emerges on its own. What I'm saying is the environment that we crafted ends up being an environment where the optimal policy is to collaborate. So if we now made it, we could make it an adversarial example if we wanted to. We could have the resources never replenish. Okay, now from each AI's perspective, it's now a competitive environment where if they want to survive for as long as possible, they should be greedy. They should take everything that they want because the resources don't come back, right? So the environment they're in will craft that policy. Just in this case, our environment is one where sustainability will lead to the optimal solution. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay.
The example is like everyone has nuclear weapons, so at state.
Right. So there was an example given of if everyone has nuclear weapons. Again, if the reward is for everyone to survive, or not everyone, even if you want to survive as long as possible, my guess would be if the only action is send the nukes or don't send the nukes, the optimal policy would probably be that nobody ever sends them because in that environment, everyone lives for as long as possible. Sometimes you might send it and then sometimes you'll win, sometimes you'll lose, which in the average case works out to not being as optimal as never sending them, right? If that makes sense? Okay, perfect. Sorry to hijack this here. Yeah, another question. So the question for those online is this AI that we developed in the hands of anyone else? Does any third-party entities have it? The answer is no. This was trained 100% on my local hardware, and when it's deployed, it's like encrypted within all the software. So is there maybe some way that someone could take like an online demo we did and backwards engineer out the policy? Perhaps, but that would be just a risk of like any software. In terms of, did we train this on any other online platforms? No. It's completely in our hands right now. Yeah. Okay, so if there's no more questions for me, I will take my seat again, but I am free to chat, afterwards if anyone has questions about these things. Okay, thanks so much. I'll turn it back over to Jodie.
Okay, so as we kind of go into our last little bit of this discussion today, so you can, again, be thinking about this, and you can put your thoughts in the Padlet around, are you doing anything right now in whatever it is or wherever you work? Are you working in relationship or in partnership with Indigenous peoples or communities? And if you're not, how can you think about what are the ways in which you might create those spaces? for that to happen, because hopefully you're seeing here that when we do things in partnership, it's just such a win-win, because you're just adding to that wealth of knowledge that has been left out or pushed off to the margins. And what a disservice we're doing by not including that. So the last little part is, we've touched on this as well throughout our time together, is the problems in terms of right now where we are with this technology. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the hands scenario, like why can't it figure out hands? But when we talk to students, kids now need to really, really more than ever be critical about what they're taking in online, because they're all online pretty much. And so how do you know what's real and what's not? That's what they're faced with today. So we were recently up north working in a couple of communities, and we were talking to students about you can see, I know with the sunlight it's kind of hard to see it, but maybe this picture might look real, like two guys at a party, but if you look closer, does anybody see something a little off? What about them?
Too many fingers on one.
Yeah, too many fingers. So there's some things that we can start to look at. For example, these are not humans. These are not people. These are AI-generated faces. So maybe on the first onset, it might look like people. Kind of looks like people to me. There was a study shown that just 50%, that people have a 50% chance of spotting an AI face. So again, how do you know what you're interacting with is real or not? So there's all kinds of online things that we can learn and that we can share around kind of clues. So there's this one here where AI-generated faces, as you can see in this little video here, it doesn't know how to do different eye placements. It'll always put them in the exact same spot every single time. You could look closely. We talked about the fingers and the hands. There's, ear shapes. You could look at earrings that might not match. There are subtle clues that, to just be aware of trying to figure out what's, real or not. Really creepy is that there are lots of things now where you can make videos of people. I love Canva for the work that I do, and I didn't even know this, but now there's AI apps, so I took a picture of me, I took the background out, and then the AI made me talk. I don't know if it'll press it. No, I don't know how to. Hold on. Pause. My eyes are blinking, my head's kind of moving, my eyebrows are going.
With the advancement of AI technology, it will become really difficult to tell the difference between who is a real human and who is not. Or perhaps one day, artificial intelligence will develop consciousness and become real, just like you. But for now, you get me.
Really creepy. So this has and again, lawsuits galore are now coming out. So not long ago, Taylor Swift had a big lawsuit because there was all kinds of really explicit photos that went around on social media that was not her. And right now, with the election in the States coming up, can you imagine? You're going to go vote for somebody, and there's a video of them talking about something, and it's not really them. So there's, there's people are scrambling with how to put in protections to prevent, false, falsifying people and videos and things like that. So this is the era that we are now in, and this is what our children are facing. So we need to give them really good, technical literacy skills to be able to navigate this. And then lastly, the biggest thing that we worry about, especially in the work that we do, myself in Indigenous education and my colleagues in the equity education and anti-Black racism education, is it's still at the heart of this is racism and colonialism. And so in this article, again, that's posted on our website, the two big points is, one, thinking about how much of the extraction of minerals is happening? Because remember, we were talking about like mining and stuff. So how much of this is actually going to physically create technology and machines? Because you got to get the minerals from somewhere. And how is that process happening? And then lastly here is that the information that's being pulled is coming from inherently biased and racist ideologies that are still prevalent in terms of what AI is grabbing, in terms of its information it's using. We heard, about the English language, for example, as being kind of like right now as the go-to main place for stuff written in which language. So, for example, I did this with, where's Jonathan? Hey, okay, so we were doing a presentation together last week, and so we used ChatGPT and put in the prompt, create an image of a professor. So this is AI, right, coming up with its idea. So the first thing it goes to, look at that image, an old white guy. So when we think about professors, who do we, right? Like we could say when we talk about white supremacy ideology, like to understand the ideology behind it is that whiteness is always centered. And so we still have problematic data where it's being pulled that it's defaulting to that still. So when we put in the prompt, create an image of a teacher, what do you think it came up with? Any ideas? Da-da-da-da. Yeah. Right? So we have to be aware of where information is coming from and the outputs of that. And then lastly is around, and I see this happening a lot, especially in, academic settings, is, this idea of data sovereignty and who actually owns and controls information, especially like with permissions. So remember, colonialism is always about extracting out of the land. Well, now we have a case of extracting knowledge. We're extracting knowledge. Do we even ask permission first? A lot of times we don't even think about that. We talk about plagiarism all the time, but then when it comes to Indigenous knowledges, for some reason that just goes out the window. It's like everybody thinks it's a free-for-all. First of all, we don't even compensate people properly when they do share their knowledge. And so, we really have to give pause to think. And I'm gonna give a very kind of a side example of this that we use when we talk to educators in K-12 is we see a lot of this happen in terms of artworks that's been hugely appropriated into education to the point where it's been very normalized. So we are doing things, we have problematic practices that have happened over a long period of time that have become normalized and people don't even think about it as being problematic. So a lot of times in elementary, for example, kids will paint like Morrisseau. Actually I saw a Morrisseau painting. Yeah. Is that a Morrisseau? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So paint like Morrisseau. So maybe the teacher, teachers, we do this a lot, show kids a, cool image, and then we paint just like them. And there's all kinds of little cute paintings of Morrisseau everywhere. Did anybody ask? Did Morrisseau, when he was alive, say, yes, I give permission to copy my paintings? And I'll tell you, what do you think he said when he was alive, when asked that question? He actually said no. And his family today says no. No, we don't consent to having the artwork replicated. So do you see how, right? So we've now been doing something in education, and it's not because of people are trying to cause harm, but we have to talk about intention versus impact. Everyone has really good intentions, so we put that aside. It's got nothing to do with intention, but we have to be really thinking about impact. How do we know what we're doing? What kind of impact is it having? How do we know? So this really kind of leaves us, like I think in all of the presentations in the last day and a half have really kind of left us with this thinking about the ethics and how we do this. Just like any technology, it can be really, really good and it can be really, really harmful. I think in regards to AI, we can't hide from it. It's here, it's happening, whether we like it or not. And so how do we move forward with, holding this in mind? So we'll leave the last little maybe 15 minutes together, and we'll just kind of, in your natural groupings, you can go to the Padlet, and there's some questions kind of to leave off on, and in about 15 minutes, we'll kind of come back and share a little bit about what you came up with in those discussions. So thinking about how might you advocate for the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge systems if it's not happening? Where might you see challenges? And what might be some next steps? And then, of course, what questions might you still have? And even though we're not, necessarily going to be able to provide direct answers for any of these, but this will help us in even our thinking of this bigger project moving forward. What are those bigger next steps in education? So we'll just leave it there for the last, say, 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll talk about that together. So for those who are joining us online, thank you for your time with us online. We're just going to have this last little part as an in-person discussion, but certainly you can follow along on that Padlet link and stay in touch on the main website where everything will be posted.